All right. How's everyone doing this morning? Good. We should start doing these outside when the weather is like this beautiful, right? Thank you all so much for coming. I'm Heather Sharkey. I'm the Chief Sales Officer here at CCIG. Seeing some familiar faces. So we try to do 3 or 4 of these workshops a year for our current clients and prospective clients. So thanks so much for joining. We have a gajillion burritos in the back. Take some to go, take some to your kids on your way home or whatever you want to do. Just grab them on your way out. So really excited. We love workers' comp, right? So does everybody else in this room. That's why you're here. To talk about cost containment strategies with our very own Gary Glader, 43 years of experience in the industry. He's our leader for risk and safety practices. We give him like a million titles. So he's all things risk management and really takes care of our clients. So Gary, thanks so much for doing this, our 3rd so far this year, right? Yeah. And then with us today, we have Brett over here. Raise your hand. Hello. You all saw his bio in the invite. So he is the president of Injury Care Associates. So thank you so much for joining today. So we'll be hearing from him today. And then we do have Jillian, who I believe she's stuck in the traffic, but she's with Pinnacle, impressive background as well. And she's a return to work consultant. So we will be hearing from her today. So again, thanks everyone so much for coming. And Gary, I'll hand it over to you.
Morning, everybody. How are you doing? Ready to talk a little work comp cost containment? So what I'd like to do, and I think Brett is on the same page with me, as we go through our presentation, if you have any questions, probably the best thing to do is just go ahead, raise your hand and ask the question. No need to wait until the end of the presentation when you'll forget what question you had anyway. So hopefully this is important to those of you that are here. I think it's an opportunity. I consider cost containment an opportunity for us. So that's kind of what we're going to go through. That's our agenda. We're going to talk about notification, decisions regarding medical treatment, transportation, maybe some of these things you haven't thought about before, which is why we're doing this workshop today. Accident investigation, which I'm only going to briefly touch on. I probably should do a workshop on accident investigation because one of the most important things in any safety program, and maybe one of the things that's least well executed in many organizations. Selecting an occupational healthcare provider, which is what Brett is going to speak about. Return to work programs, which is what Jillian is going to speak to. And then a little bit about claims advocacy. So those are our presenters. This is actually being recorded. So if you really want to torture yourself, you can watch this a second time while we're waiting for the writer's strike to resolve. Okay, so when we look at cost containment, there's 2 ways to do it. The best way is to not have an injury in the first place, right? If we can prevent an injury from occurring, then we've done everything we can to keep employees safe and prevent the costs associated with injuries from escalating. The problem is, I've been trying to do that for 43 years. Heather didn't mention that I started my career at age 5. So I'm still not 50 yet. But, and the humor doesn't get any better either. Sorry about that. So one way is preventing a claim. And I'm not going to spend really any time talking about accident prevention, but I am going to tell you that the better job you do as far as cost containment is concerned, you can impact accidents in the future. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The backside, the other side of the coin for cost containment is, what do we need to do in order to rehabilitate the employee as quickly as possible, get that employee back to work, and minimize the impact of that injury on the employee and on you, the employer? So we're really focused on what happens after an incident occurs. This gets confusing because how many of you are familiar with the Colorado Cost Containment Program, right? You get a discount for having a qualified cost containment program. The interesting thing with the Colorado Cost Containment Program, it includes front-end activities like safety training, safety programs, job site safety observations and audits. So that term includes the front-end work that we're really not going to talk about today. So it's two sides of the coin. We're focused on the flip side of the coin that deals with actions we take after something happens. I do believe if you have an effective cost containment program in place, it can help prevent future incidents. The more awareness employees have over what is going to happen when an accident occurs provides us with an opportunity to use that to get them thinking about things. So it's a subtle impact. The other thing I think you're going to notice is a hugely important aspect of cost containment is control. Who would you rather have control over a workers' comp claim? You or the employee? Or you and the employee's legal representative? Who would you prefer to have control? Obviously you. So a lot of the things and aspects of what we're talking about today are going to be the element of maintaining control. So we're going to focus on different elements and benefits because the benefits are many. We're going to try to articulate and quantify what some of those benefits are. So the first thing, we really can't do much about an injury unless we know about it. How many of you have had that call on Monday morning? Oh, hey, yeah, by the way, on Friday, I felt a pop in my back early in the morning, tried to tough it out, pulled myself together. I worked the rest of the shift, but over the weekend, it got bad. It got really bad. Got so bad, I went to the emergency room, and I'm sorry to tell you, but I'm not able to come to work for the next 6 months. Anybody ever got one of those phone calls? So what happened, or more appropriately, what didn't happen? Anybody? Yeah. Did you ever hear from the employee? Did the employee ever tell you they got hurt? That's an issue. That's an opportunity. So how do we tighten those things up? How many of you have strict rules in place that employees must report all accidents and injuries, comma, no matter how minor, immediately to a supervisor? Anybody have that? Keep your hand up if you've enforced that. That's the key. Rules without enforcement equal what? Old safety saying. Rules without enforcement equal no rules. So if we're not enforcing our rules, we really don't have them. It's how I drive. If I don't get a ticket, there is no speed limit. No, I'm just kidding. So some of you in the room know the Colorado work comp law, and you'll say, but wait a minute, Gary. Colorado law allows an employee up to 10 days to report a claim. So when I write my safety rules, I should write a rule that employees must report all work comp claims within 10 days. Is that true or false? You should write a rule that requires immediate reporting. Now, this employee by law may have a claim, even if they reported 10 days late. But what they may not have is what? A job. So the only way we can overcome a 10-day, and this was extended recently too. I came from Illinois. Illinois, we give people 45 days to report a claim. Oh yeah, by the way, I just found out I amputated my arm 44 days ago. Oh, thanks for letting us know. Timely report. So Colorado has extended that period of time. That means we need to do a much more effective job by enforcing an immediate notification requirement. So if you don't have that policy in place, I strongly urge you to put a policy in place that requires immediate reporting. Yes, there are some injuries where it doesn't become apparent, But if we don't make this clear to employees, they're going to do what they want to do. So have a policy, communicate the policy. If you don't have a policy and you're thinking about changing and filling that gap, I would strongly urge you to sit down with your employees, have a meeting, and make it very clear. One of the reasons you can sell this to the employee, what would be a selling point of the employee reporting an injury immediately? How can you sell that as a positive thing to the employee? Cody?
We sell it basically as, once you get treated immediately, you get it taken care of. I care about you. That's why we want to help.
Exactly. We'll make it so easy for you that all you have to do is tell us. You don't have to worry about taking yourself to the doctor. You don't have to worry about paying a bill. You tell us, we have your back. So there's a way to positively pitch this and sell this to employees. Something else actually that really should be kind of a subject itself is communication. I put this under notification, but maintaining communication with an injured worker is huge. I'm sure it's true in Colorado. I moved here from Illinois a couple of years ago, but the number one reason why employees seek legal representation following a workers' comp claim is they have no idea what their benefits are and what's going to be taken care of. Nobody's ever explained the work comp system and how things will be handled. So they get hurt, and let's say it's bad enough where, they're either on restricted work activity or maybe lost work days. They're sitting at home going, I don't know what's going to happen next. Nobody has talked to me. So maintaining open lines of communication, particularly right after the injury occurs, is going to be huge. You as the employer need to put the employee at ease and say, look, we have systems to take care of this. This is how it's going to work. It's also a way of you maintaining control. So everything here has two sides, selling it to the employee while maintaining control yourself as the employer. I know clients where the owner of the company or the executive of the company, if this is an injury where they have to spend time at home, the owner will call the employee at their home. Say, I'm so sorry you were injured at work. We care about you. We want you to come back to work as quickly as possible. We're going to do everything we can to do that. Can you imagine how that would sound to an employee who really doesn't know what's going to happen next? That's huge. Does it also kind of communicate a strong culture of safety within the company? That the owner cares enough to reach out and call you personally at home? I think it can. I think it does. So we've had somebody report an injury. The next step in the process is, what do we do with that employee? That could range from first aid treatment. How many of you have CPR and first aid training that you provide your employees? First aid kits on the job site. Somebody's going to have to be in a position to make that judgment call, right? And it should be based on some element of training. If somebody amputates their finger, I don't think that's a time to apply first aid. I think that might actually be a medical visit. So the people that you have in charge need to have the foundation and the training to be able to make decisions about what does or doesn't happen to an employee who claims they've been injured. And this gets kind of tricky, especially when we're talking about sprains and strains. So clearly, there's some injuries where if an employee is non-responsive and unconscious, that's a 911 call. Now, there are implications to making a 911 call on a job site, so we don't want to overuse or abuse it because that attracts attention. The last thing you need if you make a call to 911 is having OSHA show up an hour later while you're trying to tend to the needs of the employee and OSHA wants to conduct an inspection. So we need to use 911 when it's called for, but understand the implications of doing that. Other injuries are obviously going to require medical attention. I gave a couple examples. An amputated finger, something that's embedded in the eye. These are things that cannot be taken care at the job site and need to be handled by medical professionals. So it's important that we provide training to the people that we entrust to make these decisions in the field. There are services that are available to employers, especially in those gray areas, sprains and strains. How many people in the room struggle with the strains and sprains that eventually result in lost time and large claims? Anybody? We all do, right? So it's a gray area, but what's required and not required to initially evaluate and treat that worker? There are nurse triage hotlines that are available to employers that can talk to the injured worker and through a conversation with the injured worker, determine an initial course of treatment and then possibly even provide communication to the occupational clinic that employee or hospital, depending on the time, the clinic or hospital that employee is taken to make sure that the appropriate treatment is given and that we don't result in an overkill situation. And I think, Brett, you're going to have an opportunity to talk about the occ health provider side and what happens there. Anybody in the room familiar with these nurse triage hotlines? They can be very effective. One of the things they're most effective in helping to control are the recordable injuries that many employers are concerned about. You know, if a medical professional on a nurse triage hotline can talk to the clinic and say, hey, look, if there's no need to dispense prescription medication, we would like to see you give over-the-counter medications if it's called for. So these nurse triage hotlines can be effective for some people. Honestly, I would think the costs associated with the nurse triage hotline are far outweighed by any savings that you obtain by gaining greater control over your cost containment program. Any questions? And I talked about the importance of avoiding OSHA recordables whenever possible. So had a conversation with somebody earlier this morning about OSHA recordables and who might be sensitive to OSHA recordables. And my comment was anybody in construction. How many people do we have in construction or construction-related activity? So we're concerned about events that we have to record on the log. If we can avoid putting those on the log, that's what we want to do. Transportation. Well, if you call 911, transportation is pretty simple. You're going to get an ambulance. But let's take it a step further. I do know of clients who actually allow their injured workers to transport themselves to the doctor. Not a good idea. But you're saying, well, you know what? We're behind on a job. We're getting behind. We need to get caught up. I can't afford to have a foreman or another worker leave and take this employee to the clinic or to the emergency room or whatever facility you've made arrangements with. I'm going to discourage that. I mean, you don't know. You don't know if that employee's a potential liability. They get involved in an accident, now we've got more problems associated with that incident. So I would encourage you to never have an employee transport themselves to a clinic. I mean, if you need to, I would encourage you at a minimum of calling rideshare or a cab. The whole point of this is for you to maintain control over the claim. You know, we should have designated medical providers. We should be providing transportation to the employee to those designated medical providers and not allowing them to do this on their own. So consider how you might be doing this. The other thing, backing up a little bit as far as transportation, How many of you will have a foreman or a safety director or other person either take the employee to the clinic or meet the employee at the clinic to make sure that that employee is given an opportunity to return to work? How many of you have somebody communicating at the clinic? That's great. Good control. Let's spend a minute talking about accident investigation. I think accident investigation is one of the most important, yet one of the most overlooked aspects of an effective safety program. Why do we conduct an accident investigation? What do we want to learn? Yeah, exactly. The whole point is to find out what caused the accident, right? Determine the root causes. And once we determine the root causes, let's come up with a strategy to keep it from happening again. Now, that strategy could be anything. That strategy could be as simple as you broke a safety rule that we've talked about multiple times, and you didn't follow the rules that we have in place to keep you from being injured. And therefore, the corrective action would be what? What would you do to an employee who breaks the rules? What should you do to an employee that breaks the rules? Disciplinary action. And it doesn't have to involve termination. It involves putting the employee on notice that your actions, your behaviors contributed to this accident, and there will be consequences for that. Because, again, if we have rules that aren't enforced, we don't have rules. The other unique thing in Colorado is the impact that discipline can have on the permanency settlement, if there is going to be a permanency settlement. How much of a reduction do they get in their permanency settlement if they broke an established safety rule? Anybody? I thought it's up to 50%. Up to 50%. In Illinois, we gave them more money for breaking the rule because it's a bad work comp state. See, I thought that was funny. I guess it's not funny if you're having to pay for the penalty. So, accident investigation needs to determine what we need to do to keep something similar from happening again in the future. A safety program that is so efficient that no one really knows that there was an accident is not effective. If, I take the tollway because I live in Windsor, so it's much more efficient to me to get down here using the tollway. And we have the little, the pass, right? The tollway pass. It would not be a good idea to issue employees an accident pass that simply gets scanned and then they go to the doctor, because we're creating an open pathway for people to get hurt and be processed. I believe there needs to be an interruption, enough of an interruption that it gets people's attention. I think it would be important for employees to know that when an accident happens, there will be an in-depth investigation, and the reason is to determine what we need to do to keep it from happening again. I feel very strongly about that. Once again, I have clients who will have an executive actually participate at some point of the process in the accident investigation itself. I also happen to believe that safety programs are driven from the top down. I've always believed that. If an employee working in the field knows that the owner of the company is actively involved in the safety program, it makes a big difference. They respect it. If they know that there's a disconnect between the executive team and what happens in the field, they become cynical. And when they hear safety, they say, yeah, no, they talk a good game, but I've never seen anybody from the executive team out here. So these are things to consider. I don't want to occupy people's time. I want to get people's attention and I want to do it as efficiently as possible. And I think it's important when people in an executive role become active in an accident investigation, even if at a staff meeting, recent accidents are discussed and questions are asked. I mean, staff meetings occur. We talk about project schedules if you're in construction or even in manufacturing. Why wouldn't recent accidents be discussed as well? Because delays in a project really are no different than an accident. An accident is costing the company money and impacting the efficiency of the project. So I believe strongly in that active and visible accident investigation process. I also believe that supervisors and managers should be trained in how to complete an accident investigation. Because if all they're doing is filling out a form and not identifying root causes and not identifying corrective action, we have gaps in our program. So these are all, in my opinion, opportunities. And these are points that I just hammered home a few minutes ago. I think that all employees in an organization should know about the occurrence of an accident. Now, do you think most employees would want to make a repeat appearance to the review board? So is it possible that the employee says, wow, they take this pretty serious. If it's within my ability to control, I might happen to make a different decision the next time? Instead of trying to reach that last project with a short ladder, that last task I had to do on a short ladder, maybe the next time, I'll take the time to get a taller ladder. So these are the impacts I believe that an effective accident investigation program can have on your results and your safety program. So one of the decisions that you need to make and should make is partnering with an occupational health care provider that represents your interests being providing quality medical care for an employee, but doing so in a manner that is reasonable, that doesn't incur unnecessary costs. It's a hugely important thing. Brett knows that. I believe that each of you that select an occupational medical provider should sit down with that provider in a face-to-face meeting and communicate what your expectations are. Because this is a partnership, trying to get that injured worker better and back to work as quickly as possible. So with that, I would like to introduce Brett DeMoy, who is going to take us through this aspect of the presentation.
All right. Thank you very much, Gary. And I appreciate the photo there. What a nice plug for us. So what I'm going to be talking about today is we're going to be going over how do you select an occupational medicine provider? Because the reality is who you choose to be your occupational medicine provider needs to fit for you. It needs to work for you and your company. It might not be Injury Care Associates. It might not be Injury Care Associates because we're not located where you need us to be geographically. You know, maybe the reality is you don't see eye to eye with one of our physicians, and that's okay. I tell people choosing your occupational medicine provider is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not necessarily who's down the street for you. It's what is my industry? What are we trying to achieve with these claims? And is this occupational medicine provider, that clinic, that facility, are they working for us? And this is a relationship too that you don't make it once and move on from it. You are constantly reevaluating it. You're not only constantly reevaluating it when you have a claim, but reevaluate it when you don't have a claim. That's the best time to make sure that you and your occupational medicine provider are seeing eye to eye. Because one thing I will promise you is in workers' comp, the time you're not going to see eye to eye is when you have an injured worker. Because we all look at things through different lenses. We have different training, we have different backgrounds, we have different objectives, and that changes how we see a certain situation. So if we have an injured worker, and it sounds like we have quite a few employers in here from the construction industry or trades or manufacturing that are OSHA sensitive. How that physician is going to look at an injury might be very different than how the safety officer is going to see that injury. So we have to make sure that we at least have that ability to see eye to eye with each other so that we can manage claims together. All right. So we're going to be talking about mastering cost containment. Now, I know Gary really likes to talk about this idea of how to save money, how to manage those claims before they ever, after the claim occurs. But what we're going to be talking about today is actually what you need to do today before the claim ever occurs. Okay. So jumping in, this first thing I'm going to tell you is I am not your HR or legal department. I'm not Gary. I'm not Pinnacle. I am here representing an occupational medicine clinic and what we see in the facility with our physicians, with the patients. I am not here to tell you who to use for your occupational medicine provider, and I'm not here to tell you how to manage your claims. I just want to make sure we're very clear on that. Okay, so there's my disclaimer that I want to put out here. I always like to tell people, always know that everyone has an agenda and an objective, and I'm probably no different. I own I own 3 occupational medicine clinics. Obviously, we'd love to partner with everyone out there, so just keep that in mind as we go through this. Okay, everyone has their goals and objectives. So, controlling cost and managing claims does not begin after the injury has occurred, okay? It begins before the claim occurs. I honestly believe one of the best things you can do in a safety and a risk environment is choose your designated providers very thoughtfully. So in Colorado, how many of you out there are familiar with Rule 8 of the Colorado Medical Treatment Guidelines? Is anyone aware of this? All right, we've got one person. So I'm going to assume everyone else is not aware that there are actually rules set by the, Division of Workers' Comp. A lot of these things are actually voted on in the legislature. This is not people just choosing how this is going to be. These are things that go to vote through the legislature that establish what the benefits are and what kind of, I like to say, what the rules we all are going to play by. Okay, so the better we know the rules, the better we can play the game. All right. So Rule 8, authorized treating physician and independent medical examinations. We're going to focus on the authorized treating provider. Rule 8 talks about how you designate the providers that your injured workers get to select from, because the injured worker does have a choice in where they choose. You're not allowed to force them to go to one provider. You are required to provide them a list of options for them to then choose from. So Rule 8 applies to most employers in the state of Colorado. There are a few exceptions for certain healthcare entities that have their own providers that they can make available to them. Also, federal employees. Federal employees kind of get to walk above the state guidelines. But for most employers, and I'm going to assume everyone in this room, you would be subject to Rule 8. The other thing I want to talk about is there is much more involved with a workers' compensation claim than just the medicine that is delivered to that patient. There's more to just the diagnosis and the treatment. This is workers' comp. How many of you have ever had to deal with a claim at your company before? Did it get messy? Did it get frustrating, challenging, any of that at all? Well, I like to tell people in work comp, we live in the gray zone. We joke in the clinic with our physicians. There is nothing we like more than the person that was opening a box and they lacerated their hand. That is so straightforward to us. It's black and white. And I see you rolling your eyes, and I'm going to tell you why. Because when you're opening that box and you cut yourself, cool, it happened at work. There's no question about what you were doing, and how we treat that is pretty darn straightforward. We're going to sew it up. We're going to send you back to work, and we're going to tell you, come back in 10 days. We're going to take the stitches out. That is black and white for us. That's straightforward. The claims that are a lot harder than that are the guy that pulls up lame at 9:30 a.m. on Monday morning and he's going, my back hurts. My back is sore. Well, what were you doing when you injured it? Well, 4 or 5 days ago, I was lifting something, I was carrying it, and I think that's when it was hurt. Oh my gosh. Those are not fun. So, yeah, and that's all, we also don't have to worry about the fact that they were moving their brother-in-law over the weekend. That had nothing to do with it, by the way. Whatever they were doing outside their work activities never contributes to the claim. So what I'd like to say is there is a lot of gray area here. So we want to talk about how do we control and how do we manage that. I also want to tell you, it's called the practice of medicine for a reason. All right. Yes, there's a lot of science and there's a lot of data that goes into medicine, but at the end of the day, we are still dealing with people. All right. And I always want you to keep that in mind, no matter what occupational medicine clinic you're dealing with, no matter who the injured worker is, we're still dealing with people. What do people bring to the table? A lot of variability. Okay. So in the same way I say that laceration's pretty straightforward because it's pretty easy. But most of our claims, 95% of our claims, they are much more complicated than that. Whether or not it's a true work-related claim or not, how much the fact that they are, they've been in the trades for 30 years and they have degeneration up and down their body, how much that is impacting the claim. All of these things matter. So that's why I like to say, always keep in mind, it's the practice of medicine. No two claims are the same. As much as we want to think about it, they're not the same. The people are different. The situation is different. The job is different. Their environment at work, their relationship with their employer is different. Their home life is different. Always keep that in mind, because when an employee gets injured at work, all of that falls within the scope of that work comp claim. So when I say we live in the gray, we really live in the gray area here. One thing I want everyone to take away from this presentation is you should all have an up-to-date designated provider list for all of your facilities or any work sites at all times. So if you have operations in Parker, if you have operations, up in Summit County, you need to have a designated provider list for every location, and you need to be revisiting that on a regular basis. Like I said, this is not a set it and forget it type thing. I joke. So we go out and we actively prospect for new clients with businesses. We share our value proposition with them. And I've had, managers at these companies go, "Oh, we have our designated provider list. Here you go." And I look at them like, yeah, they closed 4 years ago. Or, hey, the physician that you have designated at that facility, yeah, he's worked for me for 3 years. So I don't think your designated provider list is quite as up to date as you think it is. So that's why I say you have to be revisiting this on a regular basis. So we're going to go over a quick review of Rule 8. So specifically Section 2 that talks about designating your designated provider list. So when an employer has notice of an on-the-job injury, they are required to provide that injured worker with a list of designated providers for them to choose from, and they have to do that within 7 business days following the date of the injury. Now, in the same way that Gary talked earlier about don't wait for 10 days to have them report the injury, get the designated provider list to them immediately, because as soon as that horse is out of the barn, it is that much harder bringing it back in, okay? So in the same way, you want to have a policy that says you're going to report your injury immediately, regardless of how severe it is. Everyone on your team that is in a supervisory or manager capacity needs to know the very next thing they're doing is here is your designated provider list. And it has to be delivered to them in a verifiable manner. You need to provide it to them, have them sign that they received it. Have them know where they want to treat. On that form, have them sign that it was received. Have them date that and keep that as part of that injury packet. Okay, it is really, really important. Now, in a best case scenario, the injured worker would sustain their injury. They report it immediately. They get their list of designated providers, they choose their clinic, and that claim is managed at that occupational medicine clinic. Someone that is savvy and trained in workers' comp in Colorado. We don't want those Illinois providers out here in Colorado, nor maybe California. It's a different world. But you want them treating with that one facility from the beginning of their claim to the end of the claim. Continuity of providers is really important when we're talking about managing the claim. So deliver that to them, have them select their provider, have them sign it, give them a copy of it, send them on their way to the provider, hopefully with a chaperone, and then go ahead and keep that for your records. Okay?
They will stay there out the store. So initially talk clear either just
Yeah, so there's all kinds of nuances in there. Now, what we're going to talk about is, I'm going to jump ahead here real quick because you just brought up a really good question. The way the law is written, depending on how many providers are in an area, dictates how many providers you need to make available. So if you have a project in Summit County, or you're working out in Sterling, there very likely are not going to be that many occupational medicine savvy facilities within a 30-mile radius. So if there are only 3 or less providers within that 30-mile radius, you only have to offer that employee a choice of 1. Now, if there are at least 4, but less than 9, so maybe you're in Fort Collins, you're in Greeley, you're in an area that doesn't quite have the density that we do in Denver, then you have to offer them 2 selections. But in an area such as Denver, where we are very fortunate to have quite a few occupational medicine savvy providers, you have to offer them 4 choices. Okay. So if let's say someone typically is based here in Denver and they're working up in Summit County, if they sustain the injury in Summit County, they are technically away from their typical job site. So they get to go establish care. You kind of look at it as they're going to go to maybe an urgent care. They're going to go to a local facility to stabilize whatever is going on with them. Then when they get back, now you're going to have them choose from that occupational medicine provider list for what is called longitudinal care. So you can kind of look at it as there's 2 types of care that we talk about. There's episodic care and there's longitudinal care. Episodic care is that one-off. They're going to be seen once or twice. They go to the urgent care, they get the x-ray, they're told nothing's fractured, they're okay, they go on their merry way, they don't need any more treatment. They come in, they have a laceration, we suture it up, take the sutures out in 10 days, they go on their way. That's kind of episodic care. They're just these one-offs here and there. Now, longitudinal care, when we're looking at that in the occupational medicine world, that is managing a claim. That's the physical therapy. It's the chiropractic treatment. That is going to the, orthopedic or the PM&R specialist. That is managing everything associated with the medical treatment that patient's going to need over weeks or months and, gosh, hope not years. Okay? Yes, sir.
Plus, so you're all over the state. Current list in our software for the accident. It's right there for our closest clinic. I would say, so especially we push go to the town lately. Stand in that clinic with a designated driver. He'd arrive. There'll be a doctor on staff. If there's a receptionist, then they'll either greet, send them to another clinic, and so they're all lit on it with. So then, I was not aware you could basically that's just in the pneumosonic gear. That's the one-time thing for now. But you always follow them, people, here.
Yeah. And so we'll talk about Rule 8-3 kind of talks for that emergency, that one-off care. You don't have to have those providers listed on your designated provider list. I would recommend you look at your designated provider list. This is your core team of specialized occupational medicine providers that you trust to handle those claims long term. Because if someone has an injury that happens, at a one-off location, they're going to need to go to an urgent care. They might need to go to an emergency department to get to be stabilized, but we're going to bring them back in to manage that claim long term, because I'd also say that's where most of your financial risk is going to lie, is in that long-term case management. So I'm going to back up a little bit and we'll come back to that rule 8.3. So the designated provider list. So whether you are designating 2 or 4, or honestly, we see some clients, they have a designated provider list of like 12, and you're just kind of rolling your eyes going, why have your list at that point? You're kind of undermining why you have a list. So when you're talking about controlling a claim, because Gary's talking a lot about this, controlling a claim, once that enters the work comp system, and Jillian, I'm sure you can talk about this a little bit more, you only actually have so much control over the claim at that point, because the medical treatment guidelines really do dictate what can the providers do and what kind of treatment does that injured worker have access to at that point. So we'll talk about this whole idea of like directing care, but has everyone heard of directing care? Does anyone know what that is? Directing care is when you have a non-medical provider that is trying to make medical decisions. It's kind of like you're getting out of your depth a little bit, So what we talk about with directing care is you are legally not allowed to go to that injured worker's physician and say, you cannot do this, or you need to do this. Now, it can be hard as an employer, especially in a safety sensitive environment, to not walk in and be like, well, wait a minute, you can't send them to physical therapy. That's going to make this OSHA recordable. You can't do that. And if you do that, the laws are not going to be in your favor. There are these attorneys that have peppered every 2 minutes throughout the interstate because they want to find employers that are not following the guidelines. They want to find providers that are not following the guidelines so they can go represent these individuals. So the best thing to do is choose your designated provider list really thoughtfully, because once it goes into that clinic, you really need to trust that physician that's treating your injured worker. You need to trust that that physician understands your business, understands that there are a lot more costs associated with a workers' compensation claim than just the medical treatment that's going to be delivered. Once it goes into the clinic, you don't have a whole lot of control over the direction that claim is going to go. Now, you can work with Pinnacle, you can work with CCIG and Travelers, you can work with these partners to kind of try to contain things a little bit, but the best way to control and manage claim is designate occupational medicine providers that are going to be sensitive to your needs. Now, I like to tell people, yes, sir.
What's your recommendation, the selection of the provider that I would go through that office you said?
So we're going to talk about that, but it comes back to something Gary talked about, communication. Communication. Interview them. Your occupational medicine provider has a huge impact on your business operations. People don't realize that until they learn it the hard way. So what I'd say is be proactive. Interview the providers you're going to use. Quite frankly, I tell people, even if you take up an hour of my time trying to get an idea of what our treatment philosophy is and how we're going to manage claims, and you never send someone to me, that's okay. That's actually a good thing, because it means you're not having injuries. So the thing is, you need to interview them and make sure that you're comfortable that they're seeing eye to eye with what your sensitivities are, and that they're going to take that into account, because work comp is really, really interesting. In work comp, we're not the injured worker's physician. We're not their personal physician. But guess what? We're also not the employer's physician. We have to walk this line right in the middle where we are treating the patient. We are providing them the medical services they need to successfully rehabilitate them from their injury. But we're also trying to do that in the most cost-effective, timely manner that we can. I like to look at it like this. We're not employed by the physician, by the employer. We're also not the injured worker's personal doctor. We are here to manage a situation according to the Colorado medical treatment guidelines as best we can. So to do that, we have to make sure that we don't allow the employer to dictate the medical care and the treatment that injured worker is going to receive. But we also don't allow the injured worker to dictate their care, because the injured worker is not a physician. Yes, everyone's neighbor or second cousin twice removed is the physician, and they always want to backseat drive what that injured worker needs. But we answer to the Colorado medical treatment guidelines. We answer to the integrity of the workers' compensation system in the state. So in the same way that patient comes in and says, well, I want back surgery. Okay, you might want back surgery, but, and you might need back surgery, quite frankly. But the reason you need back surgery is because you've been in a, heavy trade industry for 30 years. You have degeneration up and down your spine. You need back surgery, but it's not your employer's job to foot the bill for that surgery. So we're going to put you through some conservative treatment. We are going to rehab you back to your pre-injury functional status, and then we're going to part ways with you. And if you want to go pursue surgery on your own, you can walk into your primary care office, you can walk into the orthopedist office, and you can tell them what you want. And there they answer to you. And if they want to do surgery or they don't want to do surgery, that's fine. That's between you and them. But we are very unique in that we have more stakeholders than the commercial healthcare, industry does. Your relationship with your primary care doctor is between you and them. If your employer calls your primary care doctor and says, hey, doctor, I'd really like you to do this because this is going to help our business, that primary care doctor is going to go, pound sand. I have no responsibility to you. Now, work comp is different because the employer is a stakeholder. I like to say we have four primary stakeholders in a work comp claim: the physician, the patient, the employer, and the payer. All four of us have to work together to successfully manage a workers' comp claim. We have to be sensitive to the business side represented by the employer. Because if we're just taking people off work, if we're just spending money, that doesn't help the employer maintain operations. That doesn't help that employer continue to deliver whatever services they're delivering. So we can't just, we can't just operate like we have a blank checkbook. But coming back here, this right here is where you get to control the direction of a claim. But this has to be done before the claim ever occurs. So again, once that claim occurs, you really cannot walk into a medical provider's office and say, hey, I want you to do A, B, and C. Because once that patient has established care, that physician really doesn't have to listen to you. I hate to put it that way, but they really don't. But when you find that provider that is not sensitive to your needs, guess what you get to do? Don't put them on your list, because then if your injured worker goes to that provider, you get to say, hey, wonderful, I'm glad you went and sought care, but you have to go to one of these four providers on here. That person you chose is outside the designated provider list. They're not an authorized treating provider. You need to go here. Do you want to? Yes, sir. So the way the list is set up, if you're operating in Denver, if you're operating in a region where there are more than 9 occupational medicine providers, you have to offer 4. Now, what people don't do all the time is they don't actually read the rule for how it's written. So you as the employer are required to include any combination of physicians and or corporate medical providers, so long as at least one physician or corporate medical provider is at a distinct location without common ownership. So let's use Injury Care Associates for an example. You could also replace Injury Care Associates with MBI or with Comp or Concentra. There's a number of occupational medicine providers that have multiple locations, but just for the purposes of this, I'm going to explain this. Injury Care Associates, we have 3 locations, Parker, Denver, and Thornton. If you have operations in Denver, all 3 of those locations are within a 30-mile radius. If you say, hey, Injury Care Associates really is sensitive to our needs and they manage claims the way we need them to, you can designate all 3 of our clinics. That takes up 3 of the 4 spots on your list. And then you go out and you say, hey, and this Concentra over here works really well for me, so I'm going to add that Concentra. You now have different ownership because you have Injury Care Associates and you would have a Concentra listed. And they're at different locations. What you're not allowed to do is find one occupational medicine clinic and list 4 physicians at that clinic because you're really not providing your injured worker with a choice. All 4 of those providers are at one location and they are all employed by the same company. So you're not allowed to do that. You have to provide some options at different locations and with different ownership for your injured worker to choose from. Okay? So as long as you're doing that, you're fine. So you should go around and interview different occupational medicine clinics. Ask them, what is their treatment philosophy? Ask them, how long do injured workers have to wait if they walk in for a new injury? Do you take appointments or can you also see them for walk-ins? Can they also do your post-accident drug and alcohol testing? Are they willing to talk with you throughout a claim? Because while you cannot dictate what is being done for your injured worker from a medical standpoint, you can absolutely understand what's going on with that injured worker. Does that clinic take an active return to work approach? Are they willing to work with Pinnacle on getting patients back to work, or are they just taking patients off work and saddling you with TTD days? Those are all types of things you want to talk about with those clinics. And if you walk into a clinic and they say, well, we only have someone here twice a week and we don't schedule follow-ups. If your injured worker needs to come back for follow-up, yeah, they'll have to walk in and wait. Those are types of things that you need to be aware of. That reflects on you as the employer. Because in the same way, we talk a lot about controlling the claim. How do we control the claim so that we manage cost, so that we limit time off work, so that we rehabilitate our injured workers as quickly as possible? At the same time we're talking about controlling that, remember, there's a whole nother side of this coin that is you being an advocate for your injured workers. Very rarely do we have professional work comp patients. Now, occasionally we do. We have our frequent flyers. They know every OcMed doc up and down the Front Range, and they know who to go to get what they want or need. But more often than not, when you have an injured worker that sustains an on-the-job injury, that's the first time they're learning about the occupational medicine system. They're coming in from a very naive approach. So that injured worker is saying, well, what do you mean I can't go to my doctor? No, you need to go to one of our doctors. That can be really kind of an affront to that patient. Well, no, I got injured. It's my body. I'm going where I want to go to. And you say, yeah, but we are sending you to OcMed savvy physicians. We've already done the research to make sure that you're going to get the best care possible. Because if you go to a provider that is not savvy with OcMed, this can go off the rails, not only for you as a company, but for that injured worker. And when that injured worker is frustrated, when they feel like they're not getting what they need to, that's when they go get the attorneys. And I'm sorry, I'm very biased. This is the lens I look through it as. Never once have we had an attorney enter the picture and all of a sudden make the claim better. Even though that's what they tell the injured workers, oh no, you need us to be your advocate. Let us come in and get this done. If you're at the right facility, everything that needs to be done is going to be done. That claimant's attorney is not going to come in and do anything but slow it down and take now 25% of whatever your settlement is going to be. So a physician choosing a non-recordable treatment route from day one is perfectly fine. A physician choosing the opposite is still perfectly fine. There's a gray area here. It has to do with what is that patient's presentation? What is their job? What is that physician's training? There's all these things about it. So that's the kind of thing you want to talk about when interviewing a provider. Are you sensitive? Are you sensitive and knowledgeable when it comes to OSHA? What is your return to work treatment philosophy? What is your communication policy? What is your follow-up policy? I had an employer tell me the other day that they were going to a place that refused to schedule follow-ups. And they had a patient that had been treating for 4 months. And every time that patient needed to go see the doctor, which was about every 2 weeks, the patient would walk in, check in, and just sit and wait. And they said the patient was so frustrated because they were on average spending 3 hours a visit at the clinic. That's a waste of everyone's time. That's a waste of the injured worker's time. That's a waste of the employer's time. That's one of those times where I told the employer, I said, well, take them off your list. If you don't feel like they're working for you anymore, take them off your list. So those are the kinds of things. Just interview them. Make sure that their goals are aligned with your goals. Make sure that they're sensitive to the fact that you are running a business. The provider should not approach workers' comp claims like it's a blank check. At the end of the day, that money is coming from somewhere, and it's usually coming from your pocket, either through a self-insured, you're paying for the claims directly, or at least through your annual premiums. So make sure they're working for you. Yes.
Sure. With you think somebody over there if you're that either they block this in our automatic cognitive tree. But again, it change.
Yeah.
They have the back all about so the great follow-ups are so very frustrating, or they get but could be all day.
So I'm going to say one thing. It is not okay. It is not okay because that's your money. If you're paying someone to go to the office and they're spending 3-4 hours, not only are you paying someone to not work, you're losing their productivity. Your employer, this is work comp, occupational medicine. We do work for you. We are not your physician allowing you to dictate what's done, but we work for you. We represent you. If that injured worker is sitting there all those hours, hoping maybe the clinic will see them that day or not, that doesn't reflect well on you. So I would just say, we need to hold our OCMED providers accountable within reason. We don't get to tell them how to manage medicine in the same way that, one of my physicians, he'll talk to safety officers sometime and they'll say, hey, what's your trade? And they'll say, oh, we're in plumbing. And he goes, okay, if I come in and I'm a physician and I tell you how to start plumbing this house, what are you going to tell me? They're going to say, well, you don't know what you're doing. He goes, exactly. It works both ways. Respect that, we have our physicians, our physical therapists have a lot of training and knowledge and we're thinking through these things, but we still need to do so in a way that limits the disruption to your operations. So what I would say is Pinnacle actually has a wonderful website. I promise I'm not paid by them. They have a great website. If you go to their website, you can actually pull up, what is it called? Search for designated providers. And you can put in a zip code, you can put in a city, and it will pull up all of their SelectNet providers in that area. And so if you find there's a clinic that's closed or they're making your employees wait, go look for another provider in that area, and you can actually designate your providers through their website. So if you need to make a change to your list, you can make a change to your list right there. You can call your representative at Pinnacle. You can call a representative at Travelers and say, hey, I don't like the list. I want it updated with these providers. I hope so after today. But so we are on the SelectNet list, but we're also in there with a lot of employers. And what I would say is, don't just assume that your insurance is doing this for you. Pinnacle does this for you. Other insurers do not do it for you. I'm going to be honest with you. We work with a lot of employers like, oh, our insurance carrier takes care of that. Really? Because I can tell you they're not the ones giving the designated provider list. Okay, so yes, Pinnacle will designate for you. But again, even though they've designated a list for you, that's not set in stone. You get to go in and make those changes. my understanding is they largely designate based on geography. So if you say this is where our office is, they're going to choose ones that are the most conveniently located for you. But if those ones don't work for you, all you have to do is go in and add them. Pinnacle has a really extensive list of providers that are available to you. But you need to go in and check that. And I believe they can log in and see their list through the Pinnacle website. So
selected by their doing now because I you created station leaders in the office. Things that fire that you need to fire see attention. Blah. So although it serves to need the reason why is somebody at our selected network thing they'd run before and keep them work all of these things. Putting treatment category, you say about the slave, you do follow that immediate turn.
Yeah. And so full disclosure, I'm actually insured with Pinnacle. And we work with a PEO, and we had an injury, and I gave the designated provider list to one of my injured workers, and they chose to go to a place. And then they called me and said, well, they said they don't see walk-in patients, and they were offering an appointment like 3 or 4 days later. And I was like, that's ridiculous. Go somewhere else. We pulled them off our designated provider list because it was a family doctor that also did some work comp, but that didn't work for me as a business. I was like, I'm not going to, I want my person to walk in and be seen in a timely manner, because if they injured themselves, I don't want them waiting 3 or 4 days to see what's going on with them. And again, that might work perfectly fine for other people that plan their injuries, but, all of my injuries to date have been, unplanned. So I need a clinic that's available to just see them as a walk-in. And so I have a designated provider list the same way any other employer in Colorado does. And, I had to find other OCMED clinics. It's kind of weird owning an OCMED clinic and talking to another OCMED clinic saying, hey, what can you do for my injured workers? They're kind of, they're skeptical. They think I'm pulling something, but that's how it's done. So communicate with them. Sure that their philosophy, their treatment philosophy, their return to work policy aligns with what you need to get out of them. That is really, really important. And then what does a successful employer and physician relationship look like? Communication, communication, communication. If you call your designated provider and you want to talk about a claim, they need to be available to you. I would actually state that unequivocally. They need to educate you on your injured workers. Now, if that injured worker is represented by an attorney, what they can and cannot share with you might change. But they can always educate you on what is their return to work status. Are they capable of working or are they not able to work? Do they have restrictions? What kind of treatment are they going through right now? It is not a luxury for you to be informed of what's going on with your injured workers. That is absolutely an expectation. The other thing I would say, you as the employer also need to have patience. You need to understand work comp claims are very different. If you sit there and say, hey, I tore my rotator cuff 2 years ago and I was back to work 6 days after surgery, but you weren't a work comp patient. Work comp brings in a very different psychosocial overlay. Work comp claims take a little longer to rehab. Understand that your work comp provider is thinking of all of these things. They are working through a lot more kind of a decision tree than you might expect. So be patient with them. Keep up to date on your claims, but trust that they are working through the necessary processes to rehabilitate your injured worker. I like to say in work comp, 80% of our patients, they come in the door, the physician and the patient walk hand in hand through the treatment, get to MMI, and they're out there. Everything's better. 20%, we are behind them with a cattle prod, forcing them through the system, making sure they show up to appointments, making sure that they follow their restrictions, and then we shepherd them through. So there are those patients that need a little more help getting through the work comp system. But at the end of the day, and I'm going to steal a quote from one of my physicians, work comp claims end. Work comp claims, barring like some catastrophic, you don't just get to sit on work comp for years and years and years. You're either making progress, you're rehabilitating, and we continue treatment, or you plateau and you're at MMI and we part ways. Okay. So communication is not directing care. We deal with this not only with employers, but with payers too. They'll say, oh, I can't talk to you at all because this person is represented. Not true. You can't tell us what to do with your claim, but we can still apprise you of what's going on with your injured worker. Can they work? Can they not work? That is stuff that we can talk to you about, whether they're represented or not. All we have to do is we have to document that the call occurred. So if we talk with Joe Smith and given him an update on his injured worker, we just have to make a note in our progress note for that day, spoke with the employer, apprised them of what the work restrictions are, and it is what it is. Okay. But communication should not end at any point in the claim, not until it's done. Work comp is a team sport. So we already talked about this earlier. Work comp is unique in that there are more stakeholders than typical in healthcare. So we have the physician, the patient, the employer, and the payer. And what is our ultimate goal? We want to achieve positive clinical outcomes in the most timely, cost-effective manner that we can while limiting disruption to your business. So that should be I believe that should be our ultimate goal, regardless of whether you work with Injury Care Associates or whether you go work with someone else. We need to be managing claims in that efficient, timely manner. Okay? And this is just an example of what our designated provider notification looks like right here. Again, we use a PEO to help us with the HR side. Can see it has, this doesn't have a pointer. It shows who our workers' comp insurance is. It has their contact information down there. And we'd have our 4 designated providers with their address, with their contact information. I give it to the injured worker. I date the date they received it. I make them sign it. I sign it, or one of my practice managers signs it. And then we put that in their HR file. And then they walk out with that and go choose their provider from that list. So this is a pretty, I think this is a pretty simple template right there. But everyone should have something along these lines that clearly provides their injured worker with their options. Because remember, if your injured worker goes somewhere that is not on your designated provider list, you get to redirect them to one of these providers. So this is where your control of that claim really lies. Anything else, Gary, on that? All right. I'll let you go ahead and handle the next.
Going to introduce Jillian. Before I introduce Jillian, I did want to say a few things about return to work programs. How many of you have return to work programs in place? Okay. So I'll tell you that return to work program benefits both the company as well as the worker. I mean, I would think if I was a worker and my employer said, hey, look, sorry you're hurt. I know you have some restrictions. We're going to be able to bring you back to work so you can be productive. I'd actually feel like my employer cared about me and was trying to do something for me, as opposed to not hearing from my employer, which I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. Kind of leaves me with a feeling like, geez, does anybody really care that I got hurt here? And sitting at home. So I think these programs benefit both the company and the employer. I think we have a tendency sometimes to focus on the financial aspect of cost containment, but there is a very real human element as far as I'm concerned. On the internet, believe it if you want or not, but in doing some research, for every $1 you invest in a return to work program, according to the internet, you can expect an $8 to $10 return in kind. So from a financial perspective, it makes nothing but sense. As Bill Young, our data analyst, had mentioned earlier, return to work programs definitely impact your bottom line in terms of the impact on the experience modification rating. And even beyond that, a subject I'm not going to get into today, but certainly the deductibles that you take can also impact your experience modification rating. So these are things that are all very important. So With that, I would like to introduce Jillian Gibson, who is with Pinnacle Assurance, who is a return to work expert. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I've got it's coffee. Bobby.
There we go.
Can you all hear me? Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for having me and for being here. Again, my name is Jillian Gibson. I am a return to work consultant at Pinnacle Assurance. My role at Pinnacle is to ensure that the return to work process goes as smoothly and efficiently as possible for both injured workers and employers. So I have been working with Pinnacle or at Pinnacle for almost 7 years now. I have a background in vocational rehabilitation counseling. So prior to Pinnacle, I worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs, helping both veterans and service members transition out of the military whom were considered to be disabled in some way and finding them jobs. So my background is specifically in trying to find some sort of accommodation or modified duty to help people return to work in the safest, most efficient way possible. All right. So at Pinnacle, by the way, Pinnacle is the only workers' comp provider in Colorado that provides and has a return to work team, meaning that there are, I think there's 8 of us on the team right now, whom specifically specialize in this, in getting injured workers back to work. We can brainstorm ideas for trying to find some sort of modified duty. We can walk you guys through the process of returning injured workers back to work. No other insurance carriers that I know of do that. So it's a really nice perk at Pinnacle. Not trying to sell you guys on Pinnacle. I just want to let you know it is a fantastic company to work for. So I'm happy to be here, and I'm glad Gary asked me to be here. All right, so I'm just going to see if you guys were paying attention to Brett and to Gary. Why is it important to get injured workers back to work as soon as possible? They're happier and it saves you money. Wow, what a simple yet very accurate answer. Yes. Okay, what else? Any other reasons why you'd want to get somebody back to work? Maybe more specific reasons? Okay, thank God. Well, now I've got 45 minutes to tell you why it's important and the benefits of that, and also how to bring somebody back to work. You'd think it would be simple, but like Brett said, there's lots of claims out there that aren't just a laceration where you bring them back and everything's good to go. There are more complex situations that occur. So we are happy to help you walk you through that. So the first part of getting someone back to work is we need to figure out what information is needed in order to get someone back to work. Does anybody know what information might be needed to get someone back to work after they've been injured?
What basic job duties are?
What their job duties are? Okay. What else?
Yeah, I was going to say job description or the company's ability to assign a transitional work assignment with a specific set of restrictions or what job description.
Yep. So a job description, whether somebody can accommodate at their place of business and what they can accommodate. Yep. What else? Like right when someone has been injured, they go to the physician. What else is needed? Work restrictions, right? We need to know what they can do or not do. That's the very first thing we need to know. So as Brett put it, that is where the designated provider comes in, right? Is that the designated provider is the one who provides work restrictions. they are what we consider at Pinnacle, we call them the gatekeeper, right? So they're the ones who are providing work restrictions. They also work with any other treating provider whom the injured worker is seeing. So this could be a PT, a physical therapist, occupational therapist. This could be a surgeon, any sort of specialist, right? So they're gathering a whole bunch of information on this injured worker and their treatment regarding this specific injury and deciding whether the injured worker can come back to work, first of all, and if they can come back to work, what their restrictions are, what they can and can't do once they are back to work. So the designated provider is the person, the key person in deciding this. That's why trying to interview, I agree with everything you said, Brett, except for counting paper clips. We'll get to that. But yes, they're such a key role in this entire show because we can't argue with the designated provider. What they say goes. So if you guys have already had some sort of communication or relationship, rapport with this designated provider beforehand, before an incident occurs, and maybe even they potentially know that you have modified duty available and you want to get injured workers back to work, well, now we've actually got a working relationship here. They understand that you guys are really serious about getting someone back to work, right? And that, you guys have resources and tools to be able to get them back to work. Another one is, it's intended to work restrictions are intended to apply at home and at work. This is a big one. So, if let's say they have a 10-pound lifting restriction, right? And even if, let's say they don't, they're not back at work yet, they need to only be lifting 10 pounds out and about, right? So this is a really important piece that they are both following their restrictions at work and at home. And it needs to be consistent. Now, if a designated provider, let's say they place them off of work, and this could be at their initial appointment, or this could be after surgery, or whatever is going on with the claim, they could be potentially placed off of work. The injured worker isn't able to come into work at all, right? Which essentially means that the injured worker is just not able to do a whole lot. So we're going to talk about ways that we can overcome these obstacles and barriers. But ultimately, if the designated provider says they're off work, we can't have them back until they're placed on work restrictions again. So also, work restrictions are meant to evolve over time. So the point is that the injured worker is seen for treatment. And what we're hoping for is that over time, as they see the designated provider, restrictions will improve. And then you guys are able to have them back at work. If they're not already back at work in more of a capacity, something that really kind of facilitates this recovery and improvement over time. Okay, so now we're going to get into modified duty. So who in here has offered modified duty before? Okay, so we've got like 4 people, okay? And that's good to know because I'll probably pick on you guys. But what modified duty is essentially we want to look at it being a piece or a part of their job first and foremost, right? Is that we want to see, can we accommodate their current job with the work restrictions that have been given, if they have been given work restrictions. So, oftentimes I think a myth with modified duty is, they have to do something completely outside of their job. Well, that's not necessarily true, right? And we'll talk about maybe some examples of what that could be. But having something within their specific job keeps it in their scope of knowledge, And, hopefully it's something that is meant to be, necessary for the business, right? And for the injured worker, because they already know their job. So it is also meant to be temporary. So if, let's say, they're doing a piece and part of their job, that's great. But as those restrictions evolve over time, what we're hoping for is that they can do more of their job that they were doing prior. If they're kind of in something in another department or somewhere else doing modified duty, we're hoping that maybe they can start to come over and do more of what they were doing prior to the injury as restrictions evolve. Again, it's meant to be transitional. So we're hoping that even if they're not able to do their full job, which is why they're on restrictions, we want it to kind of be this, and the expectation is for modified duty to be something that is transitional in nature. So if we're asking somebody to do a piece or part of their job, we're communicating that with the injured worker. And once they're able to do more, we're transitioning them into more work. But again, we're communicating all of that before we're just kind of throwing them into a potential hazardous position, right, for their injury. It's tailored to their work restrictions, obviously. And modified duty it can be either at full or reduced hours and wages. A question for those of you who have offered modified duty: have you offered partial or reduced wages while somebody's on modified duty? A couple of you, maybe. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Okay, so that's good that you guys know that, right? I think a common myth in workers' comp when someone gets injured is like, well, I can't have them back because there's no way I have full-time work at the wages that they were making. If all they can do is sit down and they're a construction worker, how do we do that? And why would I want to have somebody back at those full wages if I can't actually use them for what they were hired to do, right? So if we can, change the mindset around bringing somebody back to work, it doesn't necessarily have to be at their full wages and their full hours that they were making prior to the injury. We'll talk about how that happens, how that works. Okay. Oh, and another thing with the reduced hours is that if somebody is back at reduced hours or reduced wages, Pinnacle will always pick up the difference of those wages at a rate of 2/3. So that's another reason why we want to try to get them back to work, is because by law, they're always compensated up to what they were making prior to that, to the injury at a rate of 2/3 by Pinnacle. So, just knowing that, right, that an injured worker is going to be taken care of no matter what, financially, and compensated accordingly. That means you guys can have them back in the capacity that it works for you and your business. Okay, so what do I do if I am stuck? So, oftentimes, you're given work restrictions, and it's a really very, very limited work restrictions. And, it's often like the injured worker brings it back to you, or you guys are kind of given these work restrictions from the provider. And now, because it's really limited, you just have no idea what to do, right? You don't know what to offer this person. Well, that's where Return to Work comes in at Pinnacle, is to help you identify some potential modified duty tasks that someone can do while they are on their restrictions. Again, we have a whole team of people who have brainstormed these ideas. We're also experts at these specific fields. So we've got 2 Return to Work consultants on a construction team. I'm kind of on a diversified team, a lot of restaurants, a lot of apartment complexes, those types of maintenance companies. So we're we're pretty aware of what people can do within these industries, and we get really creative about what somebody can do to bring them back to work. Let me make sure I'm not missing anything there. So a common myth with modified duty is that people think that putting, that bringing somebody back at work means putting them in, an office setting and counting paper clips, right? That is a common myth. It's like, why would I pay someone to sit in a back room and count paper clips? And it's that hopefully that's not happening, right? Because I want to help you guys try to find something that's actually meaningful to your business. What I try to explain to employers is that it's really anything that you can think of that is needed at the business. So it doesn't necessarily have to be within the department that they were injured in. It could be outside of that department. It could be a totally different job in general, as long as you guys are setting them up for success there, in terms of training them once they are back to work. But, thinking outside the box about what does the company need, that might be something that you haven't been able to get to, for example, right? So this could be, I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations. I've also worked at nonprofit organizations, and I know how much needs to be done at a nonprofit. And a lot of people say, well, it's not worth it financially for us to bring them back. And I'm like, well, do you have any projects that might need to be done, right? Something that has been sitting on your back burner that has needed to get done forever. And because they don't have the resources to be able to do that project, it's just been sitting there forever. And oftentimes the answer to that question is absolutely yes. They have projects to be done. So, we want to kind of think outside the box, like I said, around modified duty. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, so we're going to do some examples. We have some examples of modified duty for certain industries. So this one, I don't know, you guys probably can't see this super well, but a Parks and Rec worker, right? So this is somebody that works in the Parks and Recreational Department in the government. Let's say they are given very limited restrictions. Typically, we see these types of restrictions in this industry of like lifting up to 5 pounds, maybe limited standing or walking, probably no bending, twisting, depending on what their job was. But you can see some of these, modified duty tasks. This first one, here, let me see if I can, okay, telephone surveys, right? With a Parks and Rec worker, maybe you have them contact residents to gather information for surveys using a telephone. All they have to do is just sit, right? They can sit, they can hold the phone, you can give them a little headset if they can't grip or grasp, right? These like simple things that you could potentially have them do. Park waste removal. So again, you don't have to have somebody in an office setting in order to have them back. This could be part of their job, that they were partially doing this, but this might be the only part of their job that they could do right now. So park waste removal, visiting county parks and areas, removing pet waste and carried to the dumpster, lifting 5 pounds. You're standing, walking, reaching, bending, pushing, and pulling. So that's a little bit more strenuous, right? So we'd have to make sure that, these things were accommodated. One of the things that I often will ask is, can you guys accommodate with like a long handled, dustpan in case somebody can't bend or stoop, right? Something where they can literally just sweep something up in a dustpan and then place it in a garbage can or bag, something like that, right? And that would accommodate. And there you go. That opens up a whole a slew of things that they could potentially do, especially in a job like this, right? And then tree inspection, drive through the park from inside the company vehicle, assess needs of trees, fertilizer trimming. So basically they're just writing down inventory, right? Doing things like, just basically driving. So those are some examples. Here's another one, the farmhand. I actually just worked with somebody on a farm who we were trying to figure out what he could do. I think he had limited bending and standing. I think that was it. So like this one, right? Walk pens, visually inspect pens and write down the number of cows or calves that do not look right or well. Lifting up to 2 pounds. So obviously we know that a farm person is, fairly physical work. But doing this would probably help the farm, right? And they're there, right? They're there counting. They know what's going on. They're probably an expert at this anyway. So it's like, that's great that they have that available. Water calf pens, cleaning bottles, changing fly traps, right? So all things that they could potentially do. And maybe it's not an all day thing, but it's something maybe they could do for half of a day. And now, that was a worthwhile day for this person and for the employer, right? Wanting them to get back to work. So I wanted to give you guys a turn at coming up with some potential modified duty. So can somebody just throw out an industry that you guys work in? And we'll use that. Demolition. Okay. All right. So let's use demolition, right? And for demolition, what do you typically see in terms of restrictions?
Heat waves with restriction. Out of that, no restrictions. 5 to 10 pound restriction. Until I sample.
Time's going to be 5 to 10 pounds of lifting. Sometimes seated duty, just depending on what the accident was. But let's just say there's like a 5 to 10 pound lifting restriction in a demolition, arena. What do you guys think that somebody could do? And what do you guys think that people could potentially do in demolition? Or let's just go like construction in general. In the construction.
Sweeping, general cleanup.
Yes.
Super easy, always needed.
Sweeping, general cleanup, right? And it's always needed. No matter what, we need somebody to clean up the job site, right? And so if that means that, again, they're handling a long dustpan handle so that they're not bending, they're also not lifting much, they're making sure, that dustpan doesn't carry a whole lot, right? So we know that they're probably not going to go over that 5 to 10 pounds of restrictions. And, there you go. You got somebody cleaning up that job site. What else? Anybody else have any?
Operating a massive excavator with them. And that's the great.
Yeah. Well, operating an excavator. Yeah, right. Yeah, if they're trained for that, yes. Yeah. So operating an excavator, forklifts, things like that, right? If they're able to climb up into the excavator, right? That's another. Yeah.
You need to expand on that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Any other ideas? You guys think of anything? We're putting our creative hats on.
Everybody worked at health for
3 years. What about training?
Is that legitimate?
Introduce them to training for
Possibly expanding their position must
get back.
Yes. I love that you mentioned that. So one of the things that we do, especially return to work, is we try to look at this injured worker to see if they have any transferable skills. Maybe something that they could, let's say they were wanting to go into, management potentially, right? Something that, and you guys saw some potential in this person, and then they got injured. What a fantastic opportunity to train them into something that they already wanted to go into And now you've got the time and they have the time to do so. So either this could be online training, because we are seeing more work from home restrictions, right? So it could be something where you guys are meeting either on Zoom, or maybe you're doing safety training. You're having them do safety training. Absolutely. That would be a fantastic way to do that. Yeah.
So I love that, and I needed it to save time. Because I've had guys that will get hurt and then go train a dispatcher for trucks or other things like that. But while they're training, while they're still on their restricted duty, they're still making their 33 bits an hour. But then if they permanently want to change it to that position, they are now going to have to go down into that $25 an hour range per permanent. If it's moved up into management, those are always great situations. But if it's one of those people putting value either in a super expensive dispatcher or equipment operator, whatever it may be, versus that tends to lose.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. So, okay.
So my preference is always to try to keep them in their current roles.
Yes.
Possible. Or if they want to, they want to go towards and still become root foreman or superintendent, that's all great, because that would be an upgrade. But any sort of like, hey, it'd be good to have this guy. Like I had a guy triple amputate his fingers, so really couldn't do anything, couldn't grasp all anything. So moving him into this dispatching role, where now he's dispatching out snow trucks during the winter season and different things. Well, hey, I really like this role. I don't have to be out in snow or cold heat anymore. After he finally gets his full MMI, payout, all that. Hey, this is the role I want to be in. Well, okay, it's a 40-hour role. You're not getting 60 hours. And then also, unfortunately, this is a $26 an hour rate. It's not making your $33 an hour in this specialized. So that can be difficult.
Yeah.
Being clear up front with employees if they transfer roles like that.
Yeah, that is good to know for sure. Yeah, and we typically don't work on, obviously that's kind of outside of our scope of working with people to go into more permanent positions. But that is a good point, kind of a tangent to that, is that if someone is given permanent work restrictions, which is what you're talking about with that person, right? Then you can kind of talk about more permanent solutions into another position at your company if that is something that you want to do. But that is more of an employment side of things. So, workers' comp and return to work, and especially in terms of modified duty, we're really talking about some sort of like transitional, temporary thing going on. However, what we do like to say is that if there's an opportunity for them to learn either more about the company or just safety in general, right? Like somebody, Gary was mentioning, if people know what's going on with accidents, right? And maybe someone's doing some investigation of like the safety handbook, and they're reading through the safety handbook, making sure they really understand how to be safe in this environment. Those are all really important pieces of this job, making sure that they're not going to get re-injured once they're back. Yes.
Gary could probably best to somebody say questions about that. We was continued at one time. So they come back. It's like 25% of them. Yeah, like
oh wow, 20.
One of the safety folks.
So because now it's on your radar. You're like, no, don't get hurt.
I did that as a service to say if it can happen to be.
Yes. Yeah, right. It's like a passionate thing, right? Because you know what the implications are of not being safe. Yep.
We started doing kind of that same exercise that you're asking us to do with our supervisors. So where our injured worker gets injured, once we get those restrictions, our first call is to the supervisor. Hey, these are the restrictions. Yes. How can you accommodate them on site? I didn't know that. Can you accommodate them on site? So that answer is always no.
Yep. That is, yeah.
So we'll ask them, how can you accommodate them on site? Work with them to kind of brainstorm some ideas and most of our injured workers now have been going back to their job site, which did also help the like what Gary was saying as far as the isolation of injured workers being at home or even, at our primary office.
Awesome. Wow. What a great idea. Fantastic system. So I'm just going to repeat back what you said for the video. So basically, you're saying that you have supervisors, you reach out to supervisors after an injury and you ask them, how can we accommodate this injured worker? They're coming back. So we got to figure out how do we get them back to work with these career restrictions? And it sounds like for the most part, people come back to work and you guys are accommodating, and injured workers understand those expectations that they're going to come back in some sort of capacity. Fantastic. That is like, you are like the golden star child of return to work and workers' comp. Good job. That is awesome. And we'll talk about how to create that return to work culture. Brett already mentioned it. Gary already mentioned it a little bit more, but return to work consultants, we can actually help you guys create a return to work policy program that essentially has all that kind of upfront work that everybody was talking about, that proactive work where employees know what's expected of them after they get injured and that they will be returning to work as soon as possible so that they're not blindsided by the fact that you guys are one step ahead of them. You've already thought about ways to accommodate, right? You're talking to supervisors are talking to you, and now hopefully supervisors are talking to injured workers and saying, hey, we want you back. Here's what we can do for you. Yeah.
I was going to say, one of the things we see is it does become like a cultural issue within a company. People know they get injured and they're taken off work. Because we've worked with some companies that have really high lifting expectations to get people back, to where people are de facto off work, and all of a sudden they start wondering why they have a lot of injuries around certain times a year or two, and then miraculously people come back to work after that. So having that expectation of, we will find a way to accommodate. Maybe not going to maybe something slightly more meaningful.
Right.
But having that expectation set really can make a difference in, figuring out, are people doing this to get off work, or are they doing this with an understanding they're still going to have an expectation of their.
Yes. Creating that return to work culture up front beforehand is key to this. And we have nothing to do with that. It's more, you guys are the ones who communicate that with injured workers. You can also, with employees. This was kind of later on in my slide, but we're here now. Talking to new hires, right, about this. We at Pinnacle have a statement, like a return to work policy program statement that we can give you if you work with us. And it literally describes everything that is expected of an injured worker when they are injured, what modified duty means, that they are expected to come back. So again, they're just not surprised by having to come back. I think a lot of times that's what people think is, oh, I'm injured, I'm going to stay home. And that's not necessarily the case. Yeah. Cool. Great example. So, anybody in roofing here? No roofers. How about Packer for manufacturing? No? Well, let's do something else. So what other industries do we have here? Nobody would.
Residential, plumbing, HVAC, electrical.
Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, so HVAC, plumbing, residential services. Okay. Typical injuries are, what would you say?
Sprains,
Yep.
that kind of thing.
Yep. Cuts, sprains, strains. Okay. So a lot of times those ones, like reaching overhead is a big restriction.
Crawling, climbing.
Yeah, usually like the crawling, climbing, squatting, stooping, sometimes bending. So with that, what do you think some modified duty tasks could be?
Training. So we got a lot of training because they'll know a lot. Yeah, mentorship part of it.
Yep. Yeah, sure. Yep. Mentorship, training. Mm-hmm. Clean up. Yep. Mm-hmm. How about, do you guys have a shop? Yeah. So in a shop, you typically do cleaning, right? And you also do inventory. There's lots of like, either pieces or parts or something that needs to be counted, right? Anything else that you can think of? Anything else you've done for a place?
It's always a struggle. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're here to help. Yes. Yeah. So, I would say shop work is probably the best thing, especially if they can't be on site anywhere. They can also, like the mentorship thing, we do a lot where maybe they're a new employee, right? And they're shadowing somebody. That's also a really big one. Running, so an errand runner, somebody who runs to go get pieces and parts. You can have somebody else pick up the items, when you're going, when somebody's going to a shop or a warehouse or something, that injured worker can ask someone to place the heavy part or piece in the back of the truck for them, simple things like that can be accommodated. Yeah.
What they've done in situations like that is we've tried to work with the company to see if they can have like a newer team member, like pull cable, do stuff like that. So that injured worker is just going through and like doing connections, little things like that. But I think the hardest thing is like, it's still expensive for, to then have two people on a job site instead of one. And again, I think that's where it does get expensive.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. And that is kind of the biggest hurdle or obstacle we hear. The biggest challenge we face is how is this worth your time and money and effort for this person to be on the job, even though another person could do that full job. Right. And so, we do have to kind of consider all of those factors when we're offering modified duty. And sometimes it's just simply not worth it for you. And that's okay too. Mm-hmm.
One other thing I've noticed is you do put somebody on modified duty and it stretches out where road bulk.
Mm-hmm.
You're throwing somebody
That everybody knows is faking their injury and you're throwing it through and they're on modified duty. So they're honestly, I can't.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
after a while, let's say
1 month starts to get really full. The other workers give it about a week and it's already full. And everybody's suspecting there's no people playing. And then it starts getting, first of all,
fluid.
that's a plate. It's almost enough work.
Yes.
so with that.
Because I brought it a few times with that are managers. You do like a modified job offer with the restrictions, and then you can put like productivity rates to it and all that. You know, hold that person accountable to still be productive, attitudes with working for members, all that. Still be able to take disciplinary action, not being able to a bit of Colorado for running. It sucks that that's still that.
I can add.
Definitely people that do it.
Yes. And I will be explaining that process. I'm so glad you're here. No, that's okay. I'm glad. That's why I like to know, who's familiar with this process. Because most of the time, even when people tell me like they're new to this process, somebody's done this before. So that's great. And please share your experience, because it is helpful in these situations, because morale issues can become obviously a big problem in the workplace. And we'll talk about those too. Biggest thing when working with a return to work consultant, the best thing with us is that we help you overcome those barriers and those obstacles so that you're not just like Brett was saying, you're not taking so much of your time managing this one employee, trying to figure out what's going on with them, their attendance and employment issues, all their personal baggage that comes with life, and then bringing them into the workplace, right? So we can help kind of manage those, mitigate some of those issues and concerns for you. Yeah, because they are valid and they do happen.
Fire somebody, like you're saying?
Okay. The question is, can we help you fire somebody? And the answer is no. But yeah. So, I mean, sure, there's obviously employment issues and things that need to be held accountable for, behaviors that need to be held accountable for. Like Gary said, right? They're still subject to all the same employment policies and procedures that you guys have. Just because they're injured doesn't mean they get a free hall pass to do whatever they want. So holding them accountable to your guys' regular employment policies and procedures will also be very beneficial in this process. But we can help with these issues too. Okay. All right. So let's say you have talked to your supervisors and they're like, we can't do anything. We've tried to do everything. Then let's say you reach out to Pinnacle and we're like, all right, let's try to brainstorm some things. And they're like, nah, that's not really worth it. We just simply cannot find something for them to do right now with these limited restrictions. It happens. We understand. One thing that we have been doing recently is kind of coming up with some creative solutions where you're having an injured worker back to some sort of work capacity that's not actually on site at your place of business. So let's say somebody, is very restricted and you truly cannot have them back. Well, return to work consultants are happy to help you with creating nonprofit modified duty offers. So basically what we do is we partner with nonprofits in the community who can oftentimes accommodate most restrictions. And what this would involve is that the nonprofit says, hey, we've got availability for this person within these restrictions. And, as long as everything is compliant in terms of like background checks and things like that, then we can bring that injured worker into a nonprofit business to volunteer while you guys pay them for a specific number of hours or wages while they're only on those specific restrictions that you can't accommodate. So the idea with bringing someone into a nonprofit is, one, it gets them back to some sort of working capacity. So it gets them out of bed, it gets them up and dressed, it gets them to report somewhere into an environment where they're hopefully moving a little bit, which we consider their return in any capacity part of their recovery. So once they're at any sort of, either on the job or at a nonprofit, now, they're essentially being held accountable for their restrictions, right? Because we don't know what they're doing at home. So we know what they're doing with their restrictions. We know what they can and can't do. Now they're able to communicate a little bit better. No, you don't have eyes on them, right? So it's not the most ideal situation. But what it does is it provides the injured worker with kind of that sense of purpose and meaning that Gary and Brett were talking about when someone gets injured. Now, if they're not at your work site and they're not, they're not around the cooler talking about the weekend, or they're just kind of sitting at home and they're isolated, that can be really detrimental, not only to their physical recovery, but also to their mental and emotional health. So now not only do we have a physical injury, we've also got some mental and or emotional pieces going on after an injury that could potentially be mitigated if they were back in some capacity, which this can help with. So again, if you guys decide to do this, we recommend working with return to work consultants. However, you can do it on your own if you want to, especially if an injured worker is willing to do so. But like I said, it would be you as the employer paying this injured worker however many hours either that the nonprofit has available or that you guys would like to pay them for, and a certain number of wages, whatever you guys decide, to have somebody volunteer just specifically for those restrictions that you can't accommodate.
That's good. Yeah, I've actually done it before. I had a guy go in for a heart thing that's just him out with cool.
Oh.
Yeah, right?
This was good. This is when I was a really young safety professional. I didn't know what I was doing. This is actually. Oh. And what I learned from that is this is actually super beneficial. These two. One is in Illinois, they have to say it, which is this is a gear weight loss state. Meaning your employees off restriction. Correct me if I'm on theory here. You're still effectively paying 8 hours, whether they show up to work or not. And if they don't show up, you have to go through a certified payroll letter process, coordinate with the planning system, and be able to get it off. So with this, as she said, every problem said. But the second side is if they're really kind of jerking the chain like this guy would do, who happened his previous job before he paid off. I'm not where he got that. Not structured. Right? They're typically going to file a lawsuit company for you're mistreating us, you don't care about me, you don't do any of this, versus, hey, you know what? We're going to go pay you at youth rate to go somewhere, check in, work some hours, pay to do it full time. And if they just never go, if you sit as corporately that, you could say as the employer, look, we're doing everything possible we can to make sure we maintain this employee's right line of life, status of life, right? We're not trying to screw them. We're trying to pay them to go pour soup in a soup kitchen. Does we care about the environment, or we care about, charity, and we care about this employer. And would he sit before that be super beneficial?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the human.
She'll use that too with some of our that we weren't able to harmony on site or at the office, and it's generally work volunteer for. He said,
last result.
Yes.
Or people to cat.
It can certainly be an incentive to return to the workplace doing the job that they were hired to do, because that's certainly not anywhere close to what they were doing, unless they actually work at the ARC, which in that case is a little bit different. Yeah. But
this is tax deduction. We actually got tax deductible.
That's great. Wow. I don't know.
It was like a labor defense, and our CFO was able to play that. Look, state of Illinois, we were paying so much money for an employee to go work here, so
Take that out.
wow, there's quite a big one.
Okay. Well,
Our account,
yeah. All right. Well, that's good. I mean, I'm glad that worked out. And it's nice, it's really all in how you kind of deliver this information, right, to an employee or an injured worker, especially if it's something that you guys know that you might be utilizing a little bit more because you just don't have a whole lot to offer at your place of business when someone's injured. That needs to be something that's talked about upfront consistently. Right? So at safety meetings, you're talking about return to work. You're also talking about the fact that they may end up going to a nonprofit within the community for a few months while they're recovering. These are all great reasons to stay active and in communication with injured workers or with employees, really. Just a couple of notes on the nonprofit piece, especially if you work with Pinnacle. We need to make sure that these people are a good fit for a nonprofit placement. So we're not going to take the people that are the most troublesome, right? And be like, hey, nonprofit, here you go. You guys deal with all these employment issues. No, we don't do that. We want to make sure that we're representing Pinnacle well. We're also representing the community well, and we're keeping our partnerships. So, somebody with a clear violent and sexual background check is a must in order to work at most nonprofits. Also, someone who is not combative, for example. We want to make sure that they're not going to blow up at people, in a nonprofit. Someone who didn't already have some pretty major attendance issues or employment issues prior to the injury. They could have personal issues going on. That's a little bit different, right? We're all human. Things happen. And then especially if an injury happens, things just start to get sort of exacerbated at that point. And so if you guys have kind of talked to the employee prior to the injury and even after the injury about what's going on, making sure that you let them know that you care about them as a human being, right? Those could potentially be issues that could be worked out. We just want to make sure that, we're representing these, both your company and the nonprofit well. Okay. Online training programs. We work with a program called Light Duty Pathways. Kind of short and sweet of that is they have 40 hours of safety training available online. So, like we see a lot of work from home restrictions. This could be potentially a nice segue into some sort of safety training. It's not specific to your industry, but it is sort of overall, how do you lift really well? How do you take care of yourself, health and wellness? Those types of things are really helpful when someone is at home. Again, we don't know what they're doing, right? How do they stay healthy and well while they're injured?
So that's 40 hours?
So, sorry. Yes, that would be 40 hours a week. Or not 40 hours a week. 40 hours total.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And what we typically do with this one, especially if we're going to structure it, is let's say you guys have part-time something that you could have them do, but you want to try to get them back in some sort of full capacity or at least full hours, right? Because you want them to be productive most of the day. This could be a great supplement to that part-time modified duty work that you have. And we'll work with you on that too. It costs $79 per injured worker to do. So, I would say that's pretty darn good for the amount of content you get. There's also, there is one for Spanish, and I forget what the number of hours are for that. It is far less. Shoot, I had it in my notes. I apologize. I haven't actually done this before, the light duty pathways, because it's a fairly new thing. So it's actually 4 weeks of safety training in English, 40 hours of courses in Spanish. So pretty nice, right? So if you were to kind of drag that out, right? Somebody's on modified duty for a long time. If you said, hey, we want to do 4 hours a day for you, that's quite a bit of time of safety training. The nice thing about this safety training too is that you guys, employers can have access to their profile and how they're doing. They have to take quizzes to go on to the next thing. So you guys kind of can keep tabs on what's going on, if they're really paying attention to this stuff, that kind of thing. That website, basically you guys can go to pinnacle.com and look at return to work resources. Just click on that return to work resources tab. There's so many resources for you guys. If you're interested in just finding out more about return to work in general. They also have pre-planned modified duty task lists on there, so ideas for your HVAC. HVAC is in there, so things like that would be helpful.
Something else to think about that people forget sometimes is when people are off work, they become deconditioned for their job too. So we often see weight gain, we'll see other issues that the longer they're off work, we now have to unwind all of that. So we also see things like compensatory changes where if they're not moving around, usually movement is good for the body. So if people are at work, sitting on the couch, not doing anything, it does create a psychological issue being back to work sometimes, but it can also prolong the play. So the more often we keep people engaged in any manner, be physically active while abiding by their restrictions, it really does do so much on so many levels to manage pain duration, manage costs, and overall.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for that. Yes. All right. So, the plan, right? Now we have come up with some sort of modified duty, restrictions were given. Now you want to bring somebody back to work. So you have two options when returning someone back to work. You can do both, or you can do one or the other. The first option is to simply bring them back to work and ask them to do the tasks that you have available for them to perform. For those of you who have done modified duty, how has that gone? Kind of informally, who has done sort of more of an informal? Okay. Yes, sort of. Okay. So basically, when everybody's agreed, everyone knows what's expected of them. They know what they're supposed to be doing. Everybody is comfortable with performing the modified duty tasks that you guys want them to perform. Great. So everybody's great. What's nice about this informal bringing back to work is that it's flexible. So you can offer however many hours you want to and need to offer this injured worker. It's timely, right? So the day that they get restrictions, you can have them back at work. If they're comfortable doing so and they're receptive to it, please bring them back to work. The longer that they stay out of work, and I'll get to that slide, the more costly that becomes, right? Especially if they're owed wage benefits. So we want to make sure that they come back to work as soon as possible. So great, everybody agrees. All right, so let's say there are questions or concerns. Sounds like there were a few questions and concerns here when offering modified duty, which happens. So what I can help you with, and per what's called the Rule 6, have you guys kind of heard of Rule 6 of the Division of Workers' Comp? I can help with implementing a formalized job offer letter for temporary modified duty. And essentially what this does is it not only puts in place a task letter, a modified duty task letter with an exhaustive list of tasks that the injured worker is able to perform and approved by their designated provider, but it also allows Pinnacle to be able to adjust wage benefits based on the number of hours and wages that you're offering, regardless of whether the injured worker shows up to work or not. So on an informal offer, let's say you ask someone to come back to work and let's say you can't get a hold of them, or they just don't show up, or maybe they're showing up 3 hours late. All of that means that there's probably some questions or concerns about their return to work. And if they're owed wage benefits with the claim, they're going to continue to get paid wage benefits until they return to work, they're at maximum medical improvement or full duty, or this formalized job offer is in effect. It's the only way that we can legally adjust wage benefits, even if they're not returning on their own. So it is far more structured. Okay, you'll have to be able to guarantee a certain number of hours per week for them. It takes time. It is a process, which is why you work with us to make sure that everything is in compliant with Rule 6. But sometimes it can take weeks to get that in place, which is weeks of payment, right? Weeks of them, getting more comfortable with those wage benefits. So having them back to work sooner than later is better. But if needed, we're here. So any questions with the formal offer process? Or informal versus formal? Okay. All right. So once they are back at work, right, and this could be either informally or formally, we want to make sure that we are holding them accountable to those employment policies and procedures, right? And one of the biggest things, who can guess what the biggest issue with bringing somebody back to work? What are the biggest issues that we see when returning injured workers back to work?
Why do you just fire them but cannot be given?
Okay, wanting to fire them but not being able to. Yes. Yes. Okay. So an employee not following their own restrictions, that's a big one. And that this is kind of an overall arcing concept of communication. Communication, lack of communication, limited communication, miscommunication. Those are the issues that we see that pop up when someone is either not returning or once they've returned to work, something goes awry with communication. So like Gary and Brett have both said, communication is the biggest piece of returning someone back to work. You can manage most issues by simply communicating expectations beforehand, expectations during, and what's going to happen going forward once they're back at work. So making sure that they are held to those same standards, same policies, right? If there's any conduct issues, we need to be documenting those, because what workers' comp does, especially with these formal offers, is it separates the behavior or any other issue related to the employee versus the workers' comp side. Because informally, bringing somebody back to work, if there's attendance issues, they're not showing up, they're taking hours to go to an appointment, you don't know where they are, what they're doing, that it's really hard to determine the difference, right? And to separate out why they're missing time from work. They could say, oh, I'm in too much pain, right? But with a formal offer, we've got something in place from the designated provider saying, hey, they can come back and they can do this, this, and this tasks at this many hours. Here's what we're willing to offer. And if that injured worker doesn't come back to work, or if they go over work restrictions and they're not doing their job, now you guys can actually hold them accountable to these behavior issues. So that's your biggest resource here. And it truly is your only resource when it comes to workers' comp, because fortunately and unfortunately, the workers' comp system is very much in favor of the injured worker. So they're gonna, oftentimes judges, if you're in front of a judge in a courtroom, they will almost always side with the injured worker, right? If an injured worker is saying, well, I was in too much pain, I couldn't come back, I didn't want to talk to my employer about it because I was too embarrassed, and you guys fired them when we didn't have a formal offer in place, it's not going to look too good, right? So we want to have things in writing to make sure that you guys are protected and the injured worker is protected, right? So they're not doing things outside of their restrictions. Okay, so we're almost out of time, right? Yes, in 1 minute. So culture of communication, active listening. Does anyone know what active listening is?
I'm sorry, I wasn't here.
Yes, I love it.
It's just listening to them and kind of relaying that they're being heard, relaying in concerns right back instead. Feel like they're being heard and understood.
Wow, as a safety guy, I am impressed. I'm impressed. Yes, that's kind of the human part of it, right? I know we like to kind of like think of numbers, and numbers are important and all of that. But the human aspect of it is so important. So important. So just simply actively listening, knowing, like letting them know that you care about them, that you want them back at work, that they're a valued member of the team, right? Those types of things go a long way. So we're going to go just real quick. The statistics here is with an indemnity claim. Again, this is where an injured worker is owed wage benefits, right? So if somebody, an average claim costs without return to work, and an indemnity claim, right, is around $26,000 versus if they got back to work or return to work was involved at all, there's the average claim cost. I mean, that just speaks for itself, right? That getting them back to work sooner than later saves you money, and a lot of it. This is also, it saves, and it saves the injured worker money too, right? Well, it doesn't save them money. The chances of, and this was a study that was done over 10 years. I think it was like Washington State did this study. They followed individuals who were injured over the course of 10 years. So in less than 3 months, 3.5% earnings were lost. It's just because they don't have the opportunity to get a raise, to get a promotion, to see their coworkers and get extra training, all that stuff, right? And of course, over the course of 3 years or more, 28% earnings were lost. It's pretty substantial. So this is our biggest thing that we tell people is this number right here. Injured workers who miss more than 6 months of work have 50% chance of returning to work ever. Not just in your industry, but this is ever returning to work. Think about the impacts, the psychological, the psychosocial, the economic impacts of somebody just not returning to work, right? And I see this. It is a real number. Okay. Any questions? Great. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jillian.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, one of the last pieces of an effective cost containment program, we believe, as your broker, is the advocacy that we're able to provide for you in dealing with this. My job as a safety professional is to put claims people out of business. Truth is, I'm not doing very well, and I haven't put anybody out of business yet. So the point is, the help that you receive on the back end when something happens after a claim occurs is extremely important. And I'd like to introduce Chris Lujan, who is our Director of Claims at CCIG, who can explain a little bit about his role and the role of the people that work for Chris in helping advocate for you on your claims.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate that. I'll be real quick. I don't have a prepared speech or anything, namely just because I just got back from Europe. And so I'm still a little bit jet lagged. So real quickly, I just want to talk about claims advocacy. The things that we talked about today obviously are great things. And I'm so happy that all of you are here today to actually take advantage and to listen to some of the proactive things that we can do on the front end. Obviously, my team and my group deal with the repercussions, everything that happens after the fact. And so we really try to stress the advocacy that we put into the work that we do. I deal with Pinnacle almost on a daily basis with their adjusters, and really trying to advocate not only for the employer, but also for the employees as well. I just know in the last couple of weeks, I've been on the phone with them, and we've really been able to turn around some ideas and thoughts that were going on from the employer's perspective, and they really felt that they weren't being heard. And so we really tried to be that advocate for them so that they could be heard, and we can actually turn the situation around, because it really was starting to go off the tracks a little bit. And so proud to say that situation has now been rectified, and the employer feels like they've been heard. The employee is also responding to the alternative work schedule that we were able to put into place. And so those are just some of the things that we can do from the claims advocacy perspective. We deal with employees that society has changed a lot, especially in the last 20 years. Everything is on demand. Everybody expecting an instant, spontaneous response. And so any way that we can help, because sometimes claims are a little bit longer tailed. And so any time that we can step in and really have a immediate impact, that's what we're here to do. And that's what my team does. And so not only do you have Gary's services, Brett's services, Jillian's services from Pinnacle, but you also have the claims advocacy group here at CCIG. So a full team at your disposal to help you through that process. So that's all I have, and I'll hand it over back to Gary.
Thanks, Chris. So that concludes our presentation today. I hope the way I look at things, if I attend a workshop and I walk away with one more thing than what I walked in with, then I think it was a success. So I hope you found the presentations today helpful and informative. We do plan on doing more of these workshops that are focused on safety and risk management. Thank you for going through the beautiful weather and the drive today. I know how torturous that must have been, but thank you for coming. Still have some food in the back. Please help yourself, and I'm sure the rest of us will be here to answer any questions you might have. So thanks for coming. Have a great day.